Hello and welcome to another video from Journaling Planet. My name's Helen and I'm really happy to have you here. You may have seen these collage books available online and in craft stores. After doing a recent online course, which I'll talk about more in the video, I have been inspired to find an alternate eco-friendly way of recreating similar pieces for your collages, using just newspaper and ink. Turning this into something like this. Let me walk you through the steps and let's get started. A key ingredient that you will need for this project is archival ink. That's because we're going to be using decoupage with the pieces we create, i.e. wet glue. So your regular ink will just run once the moisture hits it. I only have black archival ink, but I've recently discovered that it is available in a range of colours, and I see ink and ink stamps as a big investment in my crafting. I use them over and over again, unlike stickers that can only be used once. And because of this, I don't mind spending a little bit of money because I know that cost per use is going to be very low. It also means it's slightly more eco-friendly because I'm not throwing out sticker backing every week. As I mentioned in the introduction, I've recently done an online course on a website called Domestika. I don't know if you're familiar with this website, but I've done several craft courses on it. The courses are extremely cheap, usually about $7 or $8 to participate. And every single time I do something, I find myself very inspired. The website is quite European in focus, so you often have artists from a range of European countries speaking in their native language with English subtitles. This is not a sponsored video, I'm just telling you about something that I love. And there's nothing I love more than being reminded of the diverse cultural world we live in. Listening to people tell me about their art in a language I can't even understand certainly reminds me of that. Thank goodness for subtitles. On the recent course I did, the artist had a book similar to the one that I showed in the introduction. And it got me thinking about newspaper and how it has this wonderful, almost transparent texture, and how actually in the junk journal community you don't see newspaper being used that much, here and there for sure, but not all the time. So following the course that I did, which I'll link to in the description box in case anybody else would like to take it, I started to try and create my own collage materials from newspaper and my ink stamps. As you can tell, I've stamped this paper with my ink stamps, and I'm cutting around the pieces one by one, fussy cutting as we call it in this community. This is the first step and it is very relaxing. All you have to do is grab a sheet of newspaper, stamp all over it and sit and cut. I was feeling very peaceful and very mindful whilst doing this bit, I can tell you. And in fact, the whole project lends itself to a nice, relaxing afternoon, albeit you might need to wait for the layers of decoupage to dry, i.e. go and do something else whilst it's drying. The artist on the course did not use newspaper, but she did use other pieces of waste materials, as she called it, in her collages, which is what got me thinking about newspaper. It just goes to show that even if we're not shown a particular technique ourselves, sometimes watching somebody else do something similar sparks other ideas for us with the materials we have to hand. If you don't have ink stamps in your stash, although I would recommend investing in them where you can because they're a wonderful resource that can be used over and over again, there are a few alternatives. You could draw around the inside of a stencil. If you can draw at all, you could try some freehand drawing in black ink on the newspaper to create a similar effect to the ink stamp. Unfortunately, I have no skill when it comes to sketching, so I knew outright that would be a disaster, which is why I stuck to my ink stamps. But you could also look at creating more abstract shapes, easier shapes to draw, and use those in your collage. Nothing to say it has to be an intricate design of a person or a particular item. That's just what I went for in this video. So take this video as a springboard and use whatever resources you have to recreate it on your own terms, just like I did with the original course that I took. You might notice that as I'm trimming, I'm creating a pile of offcuts in the corner of the screen. It's very important to me that I don't discard any piece of the newspaper. I want to upcycle the whole thing, every last scrap. And I've found ways of doing that with the experiments I've done. So yes, I will be piling up every measly little scrap of paper that's left over from my cutting in that corner, and I'll be showing you what I'll be doing with those next. Nothing goes to waste, if I can help it. Now that I have the pile of scraps, I'm going to get some pens, preferably water-resistant pens, like Sharpies or any kind of felt tip, and start doodling madly like I'm a child on each little piece. You can bet I had a lot of fun doing this. It didn't matter what the markings were, I just wanted to add some colour to these otherwise quite drab scraps. Sometimes I did lines, sometimes I did squiggles, sometimes I did circles. I just used different colours, different designs, different shapes, just went with whatever pleased me. I did also try and use some highlighters. I found out that highlighters are not water resistant. So in the one that I used highlighters on, which I'll show you towards the end of the video, I actually did have a little bit of colour bleed. As it turns out, I didn't mind this. I actually quite liked the effect that it created. But if you want to avoid colour bleed, I strongly recommend sticking to pens that are water resistant. Sometimes I would come across a scrap that already had some colour on it. In these instances, even if it was just a bit of grey, I didn't put any ink on it. I just left it as it was, knowing that I'd be able to use that scrap later in my collage, simply for the fact that it had colour, or perhaps an interesting letter, or some text on it that was interestingly laid out. When it came to the images that had been on the page that I'd cut around, I just tore those pieces up into strips. Again, trusting that the colour on its own and the shapes in abstract would create interest in any collage that I put together. So this step involves a lot of squiggling and a lot of tearing. Very relaxing, I can tell you. The next step was to get a piece of paper that would withstand some water being thrown on it, because I was going to do some decoupage. I chose some watercolour paper. There probably are sturdier papers out there. I still had to put it under some books to flatten it out, but in the end it worked perfectly fine. I would say you'd be fine with any thick card, but do some experiments from your own stash, see what works best for you. At this point in the process, I'm just trying out some things, seeing how they look on the page. Yes, I cut the poor leopard's ear off in the name of art. I do not endorse cruelty to animals. This was simply an artistic experiment. Nothing is glued down at this stage. I'm simply arranging some pieces, some scraps, and some subjects around the page, using it a little bit like a performance space and thinking about what looks good where and if I actually need to remove any pieces before I start gluing down. Once I'm satisfied with the basic arrangement, I'm going to start gluing down the pieces using the decoupage technique. Some glue, white glue, mixed with a bit of water. Put a little bit on the page first, just a little bit, not too much. Place down your piece and then glue over the top of it. If you use too much, it really does warp the page, so make sure you use as little glue as possible. I am terrible at this and always warp the page without fail. Don't worry, you can just shove your piece of art under some books. What I should mention is that this step is really just the first layer that we're going to be putting down. If you wanted to, you could go back and put layer upon layer. Really, that's what collage is. For the sake of this video, I'm trying to keep things relatively simple and using just a couple of layers with some ink and colour. At the end of the day, I want this to be something you can replicate, and I don't want to get too complicated with it for those people who don't have loads of different materials lying around. So I want to show you that on a basic level, you can recreate something that looks similar to what I'm doing today. I ummed and ahed a little bit more about this second collage. Moved a lot more pieces around, removed more things, exchanged things. That's the joy of not gluing down until you're absolutely ready. You can just have fun arranging, seeing what different compositions look like before you commit to anything. Seeing what different compositions look like before you commit to anything. Don't ask me why I ultimately decided to put teacups and a teapot on that person's body. I have no idea. It just seemed funny at the time. I guess you had to be there. The final step I did with these compositions was to grab a handful of letter stamps and abstract shape stamps and a range of inks that was sent to me by one of my subscribers called Crystal. I don't think Crystal could find a use for these inks, but I've used them almost non-stop. I've even broke some of them because I've pressed so many times and so hard into the ink pad. I decided I would make both journaling cards and tags. So for the journaling cards, I just rounded the corners and then inked around the edges just to finish them off. There really is no rhyme or reason as to where I put the abstract stamps and the extra stamping and lettering. It really was just about where it pleased me. And I did things one at a time, carefully and slowly, so I didn't swamp the page with too much. By this point, I think I decided that there was a little bit too much white space, so I went back with a gold pen and just put some dots around. None of this is complicated. None of it requires insane artist skills. It's just creating some abstract dots and shapes on a page with your subject in the centre for focus. This piece was a little bit more like a scene rather than an abstract piece. I found this picture of a little girl in a newspaper and cut her out. The mermaid has been created with an ink stamp I have over some text newspaper. I didn't find any images that I wanted to cut out on the page I had at the beginning of this video, but it just goes to show that sometimes you can find really lovely images in newspapers that work well in collage, and when you do, definitely cut around them rather than stamp over them. There have also been some times when I've been experimenting where I haven't stamped on text but instead on a blank piece of colour within a photograph. The moon in this picture, for example, was created just by cutting a circle. Use the colour, the text, the headlines, anything you want from the newspaper. When I do a close-up of this piece, you'll see that there is a line across the moon that reads "Once upon a time." I was lucky to find this line in the newspaper and just cut it out as one piece. So do also look at the text and see if there are any interesting sentences you might add to your collage. Here's old teapot head. I honestly never understand my logic sometimes. I don't think there is any. I do love how these abstract stamps, which I got free with a magazine by the way, one of those magazines, craft magazines, you know, where they've got lots of stamps and things on the front, and then when you get the magazine you realise that actually the only valuable thing were the stamps because the magazine is kind of just a bunch of adverts. One of those magazines, and I thought those will definitely come in useful for collage. I wasn't wrong, and for the cost of a magazine, I got a lot of abstract stamps. I really did just pick up a bunch of random letters as well, and the punctuation, the question mark, to stamp over this piece. I don't want you thinking that there's some grand plan here. There really isn't. Just one thing at a time, put down on the page, and then I decide exactly what I want to add, when I'm happy with it. That's it. The gold pen came out again on this one because I just thought there was a bit too much white space. I think this piece is my favourite. It's quite minimal. I just got some crayons and crayoned over the background a little bit, glued down some newspaper pieces, and then glued a couple of things that I'd stamped. Again, I just went in with the minimalist stamps, different colours that I thought complemented the colours already on the page. And then for reasons that are not completely clear to me, I decided that I want a blue A in the corner, and that I would follow that up with a W, pink W. I did find that when I was stamping letters and things, it was quite effective if you went off the page a little bit. And in fact, I tended to stamp in threes, unless it was a big feature like that blue A there, which I stamped once. But the W, I sort of did 3 stamps and then went off the page in some instances so that it obscured the perfection of the original letter. So here's the little parade of the journaling cards that I made from newspaper and ink. For the tags, I just folded over a bit of book page and I did stamp at the top just to give them a little bit more definition and interest. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. What ideas has this sparked for you? Which one of these is your favourite? I'd love to know in the comments if you have time to tell me. I do think that newspaper is an underused resource in the junk journaling community. Hopefully this will help people look at it a little bit differently. Take care, and I'll see you next time.